Well, hello and welcome to Raj Sabha TV. You're watching Policy Watch with your host, Rajat Keen. In this edition of the show, we'll discuss India's draft space-based remote sensing policy 2020. The policy aims at encouraging various stakeholders in the country to actively participate in space-based remote sensing activities, which will in turn lead to enhanced commercialization of space technology. Well, the industry can build on the technological base to provide remote sensing technology solutions both within and outside India. Further, this policy, once enforced, will enable unfolding of knowledge-based solutions and address many planning and monitoring requirements of the country. The policy also states that government will enable easy access to space-based remote sensing data, except for sensitive data and the information. So how will this draft policy lead towards achieving a wide-ranging demand for remote sensing data and accomplish government's aim of self-reliant India? To discuss further on this issue, we are joined with two very important panelists, Dr. M. Rajivan, Secretary, Ministry of Earth Sciences, Government of India, and Dr. Subbarao Paulari, Co-Chair, FICCI Space Committee and Chairman and Managing Director, Ananth Technologies. Well, thanks both of you gentlemen for joining us on and discuss this very important draft policy that's yet to come into force. Well, let me start with you, Sir, Mr. Dr. Rajivan. Now, given the outlines of the policy, now how it will help encourage various stakeholders to actively participate in space-based remote sensing activities that will lead to further commercialization of space technology. So,
thank you. As of now, we have the policies which was adopted by Department of Space in 2011, and I have not seen the new policy yet. The draft, I have not seen it, but I understand that the Department of Space is coming out with a new remote sensing policy, which is very welcome. There was a lot of criticism and also apprehensions about the existing policy, saying that the existing policy don't allow all the data to be given to people as well as also to the business people for deriving more information, deriving more products, deriving more applications based on the data. One of the reasons was, of course, national security. Probably they did not want to give this data, especially high resolution data, to the public, so that it could be misused. And that of course, concern is still there, but there could be a lot of applications if you really give data to people freely, and so that they can develop much more applications. The Earth observations are very useful, and it has a lot of advantage. From satellite, it can see a large area at a given time, unlike in situ observation where we put it over the surface. Satellite observations are plenty of very useful, and we spend a lot of money to make satellites, or put it on rockets, send it, launch it, and put it in orbit, and collecting data. Huge effort we are making. So that effort in terms of money, in terms of manpower, should be fully utilized by people.
That's true.
So I really welcome the new draft policy which is being brought out by Department of Space.
Dr. Rajivan, just for the benefit of viewers, could you just elucidate as to, as the space is opened up, what are the avenues that these policies aim to address, sir?
So we can develop a lot of applications, especially for natural resources mapping and disaster management, for example, applications for agriculture, applications for drought management, disaster management, and many of them. For example, flooding, mapping of flood events, and plenty of, I can say about hundreds of such applications. And if you give the data, and new emerging areas in computation is coming out, for example, artificial intelligence, machine language, and blockchain, cloud computing. If you put all these new technologies along with this new data, I'm very sure that we can derive very, very beautiful applications for societal applications. And also business people and entrepreneurs can really earn a lot of money out of it. So really a very new industry and also growing industry can be developed if we can open up space data.
Right. Well, just stay on, Dr. Rajivan. Let me go to Dr. Subbarao. Sir, as we are a little aware about the outlines of the policy and what we should expect from this draft policy. Now, To begin with, sir, now how does the commercialization of space benefits any country?
Good. Thank you, Mr. Rajat. Maybe I would like to go back a little into history too, in order to elaborate about the present policy and
Right,
what's
sir.
going to be for future.
Absolutely, sir.
In fact, I had the privilege of association with the Indian space program, and particularly the remote sensing area since 1978, when when we were planning to launch our first Indian remote sensing satellite. Thanks to Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, who was the founder of the Indian space program, who envisaged, or rather whose vision was to make use of the space program, every bit of it, for the societal applications and for the national development. In this regard, what has been formulated was, if the satellite is to be in space and it has to get the data, then we need to have, along with that means a satellite and also a launch vehicle for the satellite to be pushed into the space, and subsequent applications. That's how the ISRO did exemplary work since its inception, particularly in reaching the common man in every aspect of this. Therefore, I must tell you that since the first IRS program that has been launched, the government of India, particularly ISRO, started involving itself into a lot of national missions, whereby every pixel of data it can be made use of for the national development. In this regard, it is not only that they were in the process of supplying the data, but also making the stakeholders part of the entire program. For example, I'll give you, there are very many examples, as Dr. Rajavan has mentioned. And one such example I can give you immediately is, to begin with, there's a program called National Natural Resources Development in the country. A kind of a framework has been created in which the remote sensing data from Indian satellites, Earth observation satellites, will be made use of, deriving a lot of data for the natural resources, about natural resources. It can be about water, it can be soils, it can be about forests, it can be anything of that. Bring them into a national natural resources management system. It was a beautiful system that has been incised. In fact, I must tell you proudly, as a part of the space program, and also been continue to work with the space program today in the country, that no other country in the world made use of its space assets as much as India, that is ISRO, made use of for this country.
Right.
That is really kudos to our space scientists in the country, in ISRO, particularly on that. And the other one is about, we had a mission called the groundwater mission. Those days it was named after Rajiv Gandhi groundwater mission, in which the idea is to find out, identify the groundwater and enable the groundwater to be made available to the people. So therefore, the job of the Indian space program and the remote sensing was to identify the potential groundwater locations in the country. That is very cost effective. That, the entire country was taken as a mission program, and they've been identified. The groundwater was, provided the various stakeholders, like the state government departments, have been involved into the program. And similarly, the other one is about related to the forest program in the country. See, we have the huge forests in the country, but because of the environmental impact that's happening, because of deforestation, etc., we wanted to find out what exactly are the forests today in the country. So therefore, in fact, we derived a lot of statistics using the satellite data and assess each zone, how much is the forest area in that. And of course, that's subsequently that being used for a lot of forest management, surveillance and management for many other uses also into that. And the next program, a lot of things are happening about the infrastructure. See, what we need to understand is, basically, when there was no remote sensing data, no satellite data, it was a certain kind of map it was prepared, was made use of for the development activities. Now here we have a satellite data, which has a huge bandwidth, which can give you the whole synaptic view in one go. So that is extremely good for planning of any other infrastructure projects. Right. So therefore, many initiatives happened from the Department of Space, ISRO, to identify, for example, about 15 kilometers length, a gas pipeline is to be laid down. So it becomes easy to work on this because we have the land use, so we have the other soil conditions, then you know where the forests are, where the pipeline is going through the cities, or what kind of, all the bit of information can be derived out of that. So therefore, it becomes very easy for us to be making the part of the development activity itself into that. And the other one is, as you mentioned, disaster management. India is prone to many disasters. It can be, the floods in the North India, it can be in the Godavari River Basin or anywhere. In fact, effective solution, not only mapping the flood-related areas, but also identifying what kind of solutions can be provided in that. So therefore, even the solutions are provided in that. So that way, it becomes the part and parcel of our entire planning ecosystem in this country. And the Planning Commission also took a lot of interest in that. Every state government departments become the part of these. And entrepreneurs like me, who are the part of the same program, took advantage of these. And we started working from a company again back into that. So that's why today, that is what is happening so far. Now let's talk about the present program and what's going to be for futuristic in that. In this, we need to recall recently whatever the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, has given the call to the nation under Atmanirbhar program.
Yeah.
That it is not only the government which is going to deal with every solution that is needed for the country. Therefore, it has to be a lot of private initiative also to become the part of this. So under this Atmanirbhar program, Bharat, now there is a liberalization, the change in the policy have been identified in terms of the entire space program. And the space is divided into two. I can say there are three segments in the space program. The one is on the launch vehicle side, other one is about the satellite, and the third one is applications on the ground. Now, in terms of launch vehicle and the satellite and that program, the government has already announced a liberalized space program wherein they were taking the Indian industry as co-traveler. Like this, there are a few other points also which are very, very relevant to us for Indian industry. Now, they have come up with a new program, new policy initiative in the remote sensing program also. That is what we are discussing now. Now, in this program, earlier, only the government of India, which means ISRO, was responsible for launching the satellites and deriving the satellite data from that, and give it to the public or give it to the government, other stakeholders for deriving the information and put it to use. Now, that has been liberalized in terms of that. Now, entrepreneurs like us or anybody now can have their own satellite program, remote sensing satellite program, which means Earth observation program. They can design their own satellite, they can launch their satellites, and they can also derive the information and put it to use. So that means the Indian entrepreneurship is going to be, that's opened up.
Right, sir, right. Just stay on Dr. Subbarao. Let me go to Dr. Rajivan. Sir, one of the very important issue about this policy happens to be the concern of data. Now, let me read one of the clauses of the policy that any service providers will be free to provide remote sensing data and services to any user in the country. Now, how far can service provider use discretion on providing data? Are there enough safeguards in the policy, especially concerning what we term the sensitive data, having national security and international obligations ramification? Yeah, Dr. Rajivan, sir.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. So while making reforms in the data sharing as well as opening about data, we also have to be very careful about our national security. And because this data can be misused by anyone, and even our neighboring countries or any enemies can use this data, and they can develop applications which can be harmful to us. So we need to have some kind of a strategy to ensure that this data not misused, and it is effectively used only for some good purpose, good commercial purpose, which will not harm our country. So that should be very much interested, and it should be completely done with some kind of regulations as well as any other restrictions. And but by simply saying national security, at the same time, we should not completely say that no data will be given. That's that should not happen. We should open up, but with some restriction to ensure that the data is not misused and data is given only to safe hands, and ensure that the safe hands will use the data only for good commercial applications for society. So that we should ensure. So there should be a kind of a monitoring mechanism, kind of a regulatory mechanism in sharing the space-based data. That should be done. That should be there. We cannot compromise our national security. That should be very, very important.
Well, that's true. We cannot surely compromise on our national security and the sensitive data that can be accessed, as Dr. Rajivan mentioned. Now, let me come to you, Dr. Subbarao. Are there enough provisions in the draft policy that will make players aware of their roles, eligibilities, responsibilities, and accountabilities, sir? And how
Here
far
I
these
slightly
index
differ
are
with-
important for any draft policy
I-
concerning space assets?
Yeah.
Sir.
Here I slightly differ with Dr. Raju on one point of national security and the data utilization part of it. And however, the policy in this regard, it only says that the sensitive data will not be made available without a particular, the protection being created in that. What they mean is the resolution of satellite data, which is less than 50 centimeters, will not be given to everybody unless a particular authorization happens in this regard. But in this connection, my point is, see, we have globally a lot of satellites which are giving a data which was much less than 50 centimeters today. And needs for such kind of a data in this country also, in India, which is very large, and the needs development, accelerated development, we have that kind of requirements are much, much higher. For example, you take the satellites like WorldView 3, a GeoEye, or a SuperView, in fact, very many satellites which have less than 50 centimeters data. And they are making available the data globally. And if you don't get the data, somebody else will get the data and make use of the data elsewhere. So my point here is the national security restrictions have to be there, surely. But data covering the sensitive areas or strategically important locations should not be made available to others easily from our country without an authorization. We agree to that. To that extent, a restriction are placed. Already the draft policy is taken care of that. That's good for that. But that should not be against using the data for national development. It is absolutely necessary, particularly for infrastructure areas today. I'll just give an example. Let's look at the Google Maps today. The Google uses high resolution data, drone data, then many data and combine them together and provide the Google Maps. They are freely available to everybody. It is not necessarily that, though national security is important, enough safeguards to be provided there, as far as the sensitive areas and strategic important locations are concerned. But it does not mean that restrictions should be put so much that the data should not be made available to somebody to make use of the data for the national development. That kind of restrictions should be made. And in this case, and they say that they also be clear in the policy. But my only thing is we must have the timelines. When a client approaches me with a particular activity, when I apply for this kind of authorization to make use of the data, it should not take a long time. Then my client will run away. He said the needs are today, not for tomorrow alone. So therefore, there must be time limits to be put. That the data has to be authorized, should be cleared within a fortnight or within 1 month, something like that. That has to be put into it. To the extent that the policy, the policy has been announced, the guidelines have to be to take care of that.
Sure. Yeah. You underline guidelines should also be there. Dr. Rajivan, let me come to you here. Now, very important, just one more question on the national security before we wrap up. Has different mechanism for authorizing dissemination of sensitive data been envisaged in the policy draft? If you've gone through it threadbare.
As I said in the beginning, I have not gone through threadbare about this policy document, so I'm not sure. But I am very sure they must have taken care of the national security issues in the draft appropriately. But I agree with the point Dr. Subbarao was raising, that mainly because of talking about security issues, we should not completely say no to the people. And so only thing, we should have some kind of a monitoring mechanism, strategy, and kind of a mechanism in which make sure that it is not going to an enemy, first of all, and he doesn't use it against the country. That's all. So some mechanism, regulatory mechanism should be there. Otherwise, data should be open. it will give much more advantage than just holding the data with us.
Right, right. Just one last question to you, Mr. Subbarao. Now, given your vast experience in the space asset sciences, now will there be any logistical challenges? Given the policy will have multiple players who would establish remote sensing satellite system and the ground infrastructure as well. I mean, what logistic challenges can be seen there, Dr. Subbarao?
Yeah. Let us divide this perhaps into two parts. Number one is this policy allows the Indian industry to build their own the Earth observation satellites, have them launched, then also have the data reception, processing, validation, etc. The entire process of the gambit has been liberalized, which was otherwise the purview of only Indian space program earlier. Now, to that extent, it is extremely exemplary, a good initiative from the ISRO side, and I'm sure many Indian industries will come forward. And for example, for me, somebody like me, we already put up a complete satellite manufacturing facilities in Bangalore, and we'll be working on manufacturing the satellites, both for the large satellites, for the communication side, Earth observation side, and also small satellite with the constellation of satellites and many plans that are put. Like me, I'm sure there could be some other initiatives also will come forward. Also, in this regard, the policy clearly states that assets of Indian space program, that is where they already have the data reception, processing, etc., they also can be made use of the private initiatives. That's a good thing in that. But at the same time, all these assets, the only one qualifying question for me here is, these assets are going to be transferred from ISRO to any entity which is going to be owned by Department of Space. That's another public sector undertaking. Perhaps my request would be, in order to improve the policy further, even such an opportunity also can be given for Indian industry too. If such a thing going, maybe they also can take the initiative of owning that facility also at a lesser investment. And of course, there could be a mechanism. So these are the days when public sector undertakings are being liberalized more and more and more and more. Shareholdings are liberalized in the defense area, into other areas too. I'm sure ISRO also will take that type of initiative in future. Thank you, sir.
Right, sir. Well, thanks both of you, Dr. Rajeevan and Dr. Subbarao, and for elucidating the salient points of the policy and what to expect once this policy comes into force. Well, thanks a lot for watching this edition of Policy Watch. Stay safe and keep watching Rajya Sabha TV. Thank you.